Chapter 8. Early Season Rain. In the southern countryside, whenever the first rains of the season come, it seems as though everything around begins to change. The heavy black clouds on the horizon, beyond the rows of trambow trees that grow along the village pond, stand between vast empty rice fields where dry rice stubbles rise in ghostly white rows stretching all the way to the horizon. The rice paddies are divided into grids, creating lines like a student's notebook. The sun, which had been shining brightly, has hidden away, taking with it the scorching heat of the summer days. Gentle, cool breezes from the south are enough to make the bamboo leaves in front of the house sway. Nam quietly sat on a small stool in front of the porch, gazing out toward the end of the alley. He leaned back against the window frame, as if immersing himself in some distant void. Nearly 50 years had passed, and today Nam was experiencing this brief, comfortable feeling once again. People change and all things that exist change, even human hearts transform with time. There seems to be only one thing that does not alter: the mystery of creation. The first rain of the season today was exactly like the first rains 50 years ago. Dark clouds gathered thickly, thunder and lightning followed with deafening booms as if the heavens were in a rage. Then the cool breezes gently gathered into strong storms, bending the bamboo stalks which bowed and rose like waves on the sea. The cut-kit sound of bamboo rubbing together, the rau-rau of the bamboo leaves hissing in rhythm, and then the heavy raindrops began to fall. The dark square of land in front of the house used for drying rice during the harvest season had cracked under the summer sun for months, creating a fine layer of dust on the surface. It hurriedly absorbed the first raindrops that rolled down the ground like millipedes. The wind blew strongly into the porch, and Nam stood up carrying the stool inside. He reached out to close the front double doors. The wind and rainwater had seeped through the cracks, and Nam felt cold on his feet. He quickly walked to the back and sat down in a hammock made of burlap tied to two poles near the porch window. The rain had grown heavier and more dense, and Nam could no longer hear the lop-bop sound on the tile roof as he had a few minutes before. Instead, there was a continuous ow-ow, like the sound of a waterfall cascading from above. Nam curled up in the warm, thick burlap hammock, occasionally feeling the chilly mist of rain blowing through the window slats. These rare sensations took him back to memories from nearly half a century ago. Nam was born and grew up in a garden full of various fruit trees that bore fruit in nearly all seasons, such as oranges, tangerines, mangoes, and star apples, among others. The old front house, with its red tile roof, had 3 large compartments with a front house, a back house, and a straw pile in the corner of the garden. Nam still remembers how every morning he would take a basket to the straw pile, dig through the decayed straw to cut mushrooms, and bring them back for his mother to cook soup or fry with duck eggs. But time and war spread, and the old red tile house gradually shrank from 3 compartments to just 1. The sturdy wooden walls were replaced with cheap tin sheets. During the dry season, the air in the house was hot, like sitting inside a furnace. The dense green bamboo hedge that served as a fence outside the moat surrounding the garden was ordered to be trimmed in 1951 by the French Army, fearing it might provide cover for the Viet Minh guerrillas. The mango and guava trees, which provided shade during scorching summer afternoons, where Nam and his sister would pick chilies to crush with salt and eat with bitter guava and green mangoes, were also gone, disappearing with time. The rain had stopped completely outside. The large dark clouds hanging in the sky were blown away by the wind to another place, and beams of refracted light in the rising steam created beautiful multicolored rainbows. Just then, Nam's cousin and his wife arrived, pushing the door open and entering the house. "Brother Nam, have you been sitting at home all day waiting for us? Were you bored?" Nam sat up in the hammock. "I've been here all day. I didn't go anywhere to wait." Le Van Hien, Nam's cousin, was a former officer in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. In 1966, Hien was a platoon leader in the infantry regiment stationed at Bong Son, Quy Nhon Province. He was ambushed by the Viet Cong while leading his platoon on a road-clearing mission to Tam Quan. A vicious communist bullet pierced through his left forehead and exited through his throat. Hien was transported back to Quy Nhon for surgery, and then spent a year recovering at the Republic Hospital in Saigon. He narrowly escaped death and was discharged with a blind left eye. After returning to civilian life, Nguyen was helped by the Veterans Administration to find a job with a relatively decent wage at a textile factory in the Go Vap area. Then, on April 30, 1975, disaster struck. Nguyen was fired from the textile factory because he was a former officer of the Southern Army and was sent to a re-education camp, despite having long laid down his weapons and being disabled by the war. The communists accused him of having blood debts with the people. Could it be that a communist guerrilla, self-proclaimed as a representative of the Southern people, had once decided to end Nguyen's life, but the bullet out of mercy veered off by a hair, leaving him to live and now continue paying this blood debt to the people, to those like him? After returning from brainwashing, local communist cadres forced him to go to a new economic zone, leaving behind the house he had struggled to buy a few years earlier in Cho Lan to return to the countryside and farm. Fortunately for Nguyen, his paternal ancestral home in Long Hoa village, about 30 kilometers from Saigon, still had a few acres of ancestral farmland left by his grandparents for worship. This place, Nguyen's paternal homeland, was also Nam's maternal homeland. Nam's mother was the eldest daughter of the family, and Nguyen's father was the third son. In 1946, he joined the Viet Minh resistance against French colonial rule and was shot dead by the French Expeditionary Army while crossing a river in Long Dinh village. Nam's maternal grandparents were working at the Cho Lan post office at that time, so Nam's mother, the eldest daughter, had to stay behind to manage the ancestral home where Nam was born. It wasn't until 1951, when Nam was 11 years old, that his grandfather retired and returned to this home, allowing Nam's family to move to Cho Lan to start a new life. After being stripped of his household registration, Nguyen was sent back to the countryside to farm and eventually started a family there. Now Nam noticed that Nguyen had truly changed from the appearance and demeanor of a platoon leader to a genuine farmer: black shorts, a conical hat, and a checkered scarf around his neck. 2. Nguyen's wife was the epitome of a hard-working Vietnamese woman. She wore a black baba outfit with the pants rolled up to her knees, took off her conical hat as she walked straight to the kitchen in the back, and hung it on a nail in the column. Nguyen reached out to pour tea from a teapot encased in a dry coconut shell into a cup and handed it to Nam. We were stacking straw into piles in the field to use as firewood for the next season, but then the heavy rain came, so we stopped at Mr. Nam's house for shelter. We were worried you'd be waiting, so we came back right after the rain stopped. Well, I was sitting here watching the rain, and it reminded me of when I was young and still lived here. Whenever it rained, I would strip down and run outside to bathe or go to the ditches in front to catch fish as they swam up from the moat. Life was so easy back then, sometimes it felt like playing around still got you a meal. That's true, but staying here for too long can be disheartening, brother. We work hard all day, sometimes not even earning enough to eat. It's not as easy as when you were still living here. I remember back then, when we wanted to eat bon exio or bon duck, we just soaked the rice, ground the flour, and then went out to the fields in front with mosquito net baskets to catch shrimp. Within an hour, we'd have half a basket of shrimp to feed the whole family, so there would be no need to work any harder than that. Then we'd pick some young bok tuok leaves, perilla, basil and mustard greens, and that was it. But now they overuse pesticides so much that even the leeches can't survive, let alone shrimp, fish, or crabs. Nam nodded in agreement. This morning when you both went out to the fields, I took a fishing rod and dug up some worms from under the plant pots in front of the house to use as bait. I sat by the moat for an hour, but didn't catch a single perch or catfish. I remember there used to be so many perch and catfish here. People here have caught them all, brother. They've caught everything, mothers, babies, all of them are eaten. We never used to eat bara fish, but now you can't even find tiny needlefish, they're almost extinct. Now we only eat fish that others raise and sell. Moats and ponds that we use for water during the dry season are rarely drained to catch fish anymore. Oh, I got so caught up in talking that I forgot to ask, when are you heading back over there? I'm staying in Saigon for about 4 weeks. Oh, then after a few more rains, we can go frog hunting. This month the season is changing, and the water is rising. When Nguyen mentioned this, Nam's face lit up as he eagerly jumped into the conversation. Yes, frog hunting at night is so much fun. I remember when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I snuck out to go frog hunting with Mr. Bei Wan, Mrs. Tam's son. Bei Wan carried a carbide lamp ahead, lighting the way. The water in the fields was ankle deep, and with the light we could clearly see the perch and snakehead fish swimming below. I followed behind in the dim flickering light when suddenly I saw something black, about the size of my big toe, swimming in circles in the water. I thought it was a snakehead fish and quickly grabbed it with both hands. But when my fingers touched its body, it was soft and slimy. I pulled it up, and it turned out to be a leech. I shook my hand so hard it almost flew off my wrist and ran straight home. From then on, I quit sneaking out to frog hunt at night. Tu, who was standing by the stove preparing dinner, overheard Nam's story about his unfortunate frog hunting experience and couldn't help but laugh. She ran up and joined the conversation. "Oh my! People go frog hunting and you go leech hunting. No wonder you were scared. Brother Nam, yesterday, when we heard you were coming, we bought 2 yellow catfish at the market. Tonight I'll fry them until golden, dip them in ginger fish sauce, and serve them with bitter herbs and watercress. I hope you don't find it strange." Before Tu could finish, Nam interrupted, "That's the best. I haven't had a meal like that in over 30 years. Heen looked at his wife and added, "Nam's wife is a civil servant and was born in Nha Trang, so her cooking style might be a little different from ours here in the South. Besides, in America, they don't have bitter herbs, watercress, or live yellow catfish like here. Even if they do, they're shipped from elsewhere, frozen for a long time, so they don't taste as good." Nam nodded in agreement. Heen is right. Most of the food over there is frozen for a long time, so it loses its fresh flavor. As if suddenly remembering something enjoyable, Nam patted Heen on the shoulder. "Hey Heen, do you still have young tamarind leaves and suspania flowers around here?" Heen grinned. "I thought you were asking for something hard to find, but that's easy. With rain like this, young tamarind leaves will definitely sprout by next week. As for the suspania flowers, there are a few trees blooming in Mrs. Hai's garden. You can use a bamboo pole to pick them. Nobody here likes to eat that stuff anyway." Nam still remembered how, in the early days of the flood season, the fields in front of the house seemed to change entirely, from the gray color of dry earth to the light green of newly sprouted rice plants emerging from grains of rice left behind from the previous harvest. The rice paddies, which had been bare, were now refreshed with a lively green hue. The cucumber rose, the gourd and luffa trellises in the back garden all donned new attire. The scorching midday sun no longer blazed as fiercely as it had during the summer months that had just passed. Nam often invited his younger brother to go to Mr. Hai Kwok's garden to pick young tamarind leaves for their mother to make sour soup. Nam's favorite dish was sour soup made with young tamarind leaves and dried snakehead fish, the kind as large as a hand. After cooking, they would take the dried fish out and dip it in a dish of fish sauce with chili. Nam loved the fish's clear, fatty belly the most. It was so delicious. If they didn't have dried snakehead fish, they'd use perch with roe or snakehead fish with its firm white meat, dipped in fish sauce with chili, and served with rice cooked over a straw fire. Nothing could beat that. Or occasionally, the two brothers would take a bamboo pole to Mrs. Hai's garden to pick suspania flowers to either boil or make sour soup with prawn or tiger shrimp. Suspania flowers are ivory-colored, slightly yellowish, and you only need to remove the long, slightly bitter stamen inside before rinsing and adding them to the pot for boiling or making sour soup. Dinner was served on a mat spread out in front of the yard, with the whole family gathered around, enjoying boiled suspania flowers dipped in salted fish sauce with mam nem, forgetting all about being full. Nam had spent his childhood in the countryside, so he never forgot the simple meals his mother used to cook for the family daily. With a clear distinction between the rainy and dry seasons, the dishes also varied slightly. The rainy season brought floods to the fields, turning them green with endless stretches of rice plants. It was the season for catching shrimp, crabs, and snails, the delight of children in the village. The rice field crabs were as large as a big toe, and kids would catch them for fun or roast them over a fire. But adults in the South never used crabs to cook for their families. Nam still remembers a woman in the village, Mrs. Nam, who sold flowers at Cho Lon Market. One day she must have struck a good deal, because on her way back to the village in the evening, she rounded up some kids to catch crabs to sell to her, buying them for 5 cents per dozen. Back then, money was still worth something. 5 cents could buy 5 popsicles or a few bon cam or bon kong. All the kids loved catching crabs to earn money for sweets. Crabs would make their burrows along the edges of rice paddies, often damaging the young rice plants, so kids could freely wade along the paddy banks to catch them without worrying about being scolded by the field owners. Later, Nam found out that Mrs. Nam took the crabs to Cho Lon to sell to the northern people, who would smash them up to make bun ryu, crab noodle soup. It's worth mentioning that around 1950, not many people from the north and central regions had migrated to the south, so there was a significant difference in customs and accents among the 3 regions. This was also part of the French colonialist strategy to divide Vietnam into 3 regions: Bac Ki, Tonkin, Trung Ki, Annam, and Nam Ki, Cochinchina, almost like 3 small separate countries. We hope you enjoyed the excerpt from this chapter. The complete audiobook of The Last Flight Out by Nguyen Van Ba can be purchased on platforms like Google Play and others. Please subscribe to this channel for more content like this.